So I got the thumbs up. Hello, everyone. Still people walking in. Maybe we wait some more seconds. Everyone gets seated. Okay, cool. So door is closed. Wow. Happy to see you all. Thanks for joining this session, my session at Jfokus. And it's about Fresh and the question if Fresh is actually the next level for web applications. Let's see what I found with this. You see? And what I found with this is that I missed to plug in the connector, apparently. So this little device was not working as expected. Should do now. Here we are. So who am I? I'm Markus Schlichting. I'm a senior software developer with Karakun, which I happen to be a co-founder of. We are actually quite a lot of co-founders. So we are an employee-owned company, which is quite nice to work with. And apart from that, I'm also really enthusiastic about open source software. I like to be part of that community, to contribute to that community, and I really like the idea of free software, which is the reason why I try to organize as often as possible a hacker garden. So while I was living in Basel, that was regularly the hacker garden in Basel, and now it's the city I'm able to organize it in. A hacker garden is actually meant to be an open format, meant to be adopted, and it got already adopted in quite a few cities. So if you are interested into running an open source contribution, programmer contribution, or whatever contribution group, because open source projects are not just programming, it's a lot more that's required to run a successful project. Have a look at hackergarden.net. We described everything there, what we found as usual best practice. And if you want to contact me, if you want to run your own hacker garden and want to talk a little bit about it, what we usually do there. Yeah, that's me. Enough of that. But before I dive into showing you more about Deno and Fresh, I want to know a little bit about you. So especially what you are currently using, what maybe brings you here in that room and makes you curious about that new frameworks. So who is nowadays using Node? That's quite a lot, okay. Who's using React in addition to that? Also, thank you. Okay, great. Angular, that was Angular. And who's using both, actually? Not that many, so it's still in either the one or the other. Okay, and who's using Next.js? Oh, also quite a few. Cool. Okay, let's look what I promised you. It's this talk is about Fresh, it promises to be the next generation web framework, but it claims to be built for speed and reliability and simplicity. How do they want to do that? It's just-in-time rendering, so you don't have a build step anymore. That's simplicity. TypeScript is first-class citizen, as we will see, and this is all done on the fly when the application runs and then cached. So this is really nice to handle. Fresh provides an island-based client hydration architecture pattern. This is a really nice thing to say and almost breaks my tongue. And I will come to that in more detail because that made me curious the first time I read about it, and it's really interesting to see. It has zero runtime overhead, so it's really optimized to deliver fast, slick experience. As I said, TypeScript support out of the box, which means you don't have that transpiler script. You don't have to run a Webpack build, so to say, to transpile your TypeScript files to JavaScript. As I said, no build step, no configuration. Of course, you can configure, but there is a sensible default of settings which makes Deno run or Deno with Fresh run in a way where you can already use it out of the box. And it's MIT licensed. That's open source. That's what I like. And it's based on Deno. This is what I'm keep saying all the time. And this is probably where I actually need to start when I want to talk about Fresh. So a little bit of history to get to the point what Deno is. It all started with Node.js, and Node.js, as you are all, or many of you are using it, Node.js brought the web development development language JavaScript to the server side and server-side JavaScript to the masses. And it was created by Ryan Dahl back in 2000, what was it, 8? Yeah, it's quite a long time ago, already based on the Google V8 engine, which is still the de facto language, or not language engine, which runs JavaScript basically all over the place. And Ryan Dahl then established Node.js as the de facto server-side JavaScript framework, and then came to a point in 2018 where he summarized 10 things he regretted about Node. That is a really insightful talk he gave. It was really impressive to see him reflecting on what he thinks about Node, what could been better. And what he actually mentioned there was missing features like async built into its core, like ES modules, and the mentioned TypeScript, the native TypeScript support. So you always have those that in between step to transpile stuff. Now, from that talk, Ryan went on and said he will not change it in Node because he didn't want to break with the ecosystem and create maybe a similar hell we have seen in other projects like Ruby or Python, where they, with migrations to really fix things they should have done better. He didn't want to do that. So he came to the point where he looked at Node and said, okay, I will create something new, and he decided to just switch the letters, and here we are. He created Deno, and it explicitly started as not being a fork. He just wanted, in the beginning, he even downplayed it and said, oh, it's just experimenting my ideas, it's not that important. But of course, it grew. And so he created as a secure JavaScript and TypeScript runtime as a successor to Node. So some of the things he mentioned in his talk that were not as good, one of these was the lack of security. It's done better in Deno, as I will show you in a second. It's still based on V8 because he avoided the thing to actually write a new runtime. So also for the TypeScript support, that means that it's transpiling on the fly internally. It's not running without transpiling. It has no real native TypeScript support, but it does that in a way where you barely notice. It's blazingly fast. The core around V8 then of Deno is built in Rust, which also gets some good credits for being a reliable system to build software nowadays, or like system closed software like this framework. It has an event loop driven by Tokyo, which is a Rust framework for event looping. And it provides a standard library. This is especially important to the history where, as long as Deno didn't support Node modules, which changed just recently, they provided their own standard library. Node never did really provide a standard library. You always had to draw in libraries to get the basic things done. And also, Deno is based on the browser APIs, which makes it really nice to switch between browser context and non-browser context, and not thinking completely different like we have to do today with Node. This is really useful. It's a single executable, which makes deployment really, really straightforward, really easy. You just build maybe a Docker image, place the executable in it, and that's it. It has a bundler step. You can execute upon packaging it. If you do not do that, it will just, by the first time it's being executing your application, fetch all the dependencies and cache them. If you do it explicitly by a bundler step, they are packaged with, and there are no dependency fetching done at runtime. There's a debugger, of course. There is a dependency inspector, so you can keep an overview what transitive dependencies are. There's a documentation generator, so they actually are capable of generating from your source files those documentations you want to have. There's a formatter built in. It's similar to ESLint, but it's de facto not ESLint. It's an own formatter you can, of course, also configure. And it's a test runner built in. That test runner is compatible to some testing frameworks. I get back to that later. And it provides a linter to make sure the code you write and you commit to your repository complies with your rules. I said before, Deno is much more secure than Node. What does that mean? It's really based in a sandbox. It's also by making it similar to the browser model, it's adopting that basically. And if you want to access anything or let your application access anything, it asks you to explicitly specify what your application is allowed to. It allow read and write rights for special directories in the optimal context. You can tell them where it's allowed to access the network, to which domains, which environment variables it's allowed to read, and which system calls it's allowed to make. Also, like system properties are allowed to read. And by this, you can really fine-grain the rights the application can do, and a library you have built in cannot by random do stuff you have not anticipated because it's blocked then. The dependency management in Deno, sorry. There are already quite some third-party modules for Deno now. And you do dependency management by just referencing the URL. This is the import statement as you know it, but then after just the URL, if you have your code base, I will show you that in the demo, you will certainly not have in all your source files the URLs at top. You can put them into an import map, so you have them at a central place in your project. And yeah, it's compatible, or basically it's working with ES6 modules, and you can consume these ES6 modules most of the times from those popular package CDNs like ESM.sh and others. And also Deno provides a package registry to do that. As I said, it will create a global cache on bundler, on its bundler step. So, and doing runtime on your developer machine, there will also be not something similar than node modules. It will push the version if it fetches into that global cache. So it's reused between projects. So what now was recently added and what really broadens the scope where Deno can be practically used is that they can now use and leverage from the existing node modules which are out there. This is really straightforward to do. Instead of an URL, you specify it via an npm specifier instead of HTTP, and then it will fetch the package from npmjs.org and place them also in sort of a global node modules folder. So it's reused again between the projects. If you want to use node code in Deno, which used some of the standard functions in Node, there are polyfills provided. Like in the standard package, the /node, they implemented polyfills, so you can actually quite quickly adopt Node code to use it on Deno. So to give you an idea now, after we have seen Deno, where Fresh would be working, this is a comparison what we have nowadays. There's Node, there's the transpiler for your TypeScript, there's your server-side code, then you would, on top of that, have your front-end framework, and, whoops, it was too fast, and then your code for the front end. And obviously, over here we see that. With Fresh, as you don't have the transpiler anymore, it's a little bit more like this. And also it's more, the Fresh box is longer than actually our front-end frameworks nowadays are, because Fresh is also pushing a lot to split more between server and client side. And this is what I mentioned, what I meant, or what I was going for when I meant that island-based client hydration thing. What is that actually about, and why is Fresh pushing you to think about it and not building or not just providing you a new way to do SPAs again? This is from the chart is from the Web Archive Almanac. They are providing every year, and it shows what the client artifacts have increased in size over the last 10 years. And the dark line is for mobile, the green line is for desktop, and you see that the mobile line almost, I mean, it's close, it's not quite that, but almost increased by 10 times. So back in 10 years ago, we were delivering like about 250 kilobyte packages per web page to the client, and now we are delivering 2 megabytes. And this is a lot of stuff to process for a mobile device that runs on a battery that must not be drained. And now this is probably the thing why more and more often you might see now come up again with the phrase of server-side rendering. So one might think, oh, is the pendulum swinging back now? Are we going back there? So maybe yes, maybe this is just too much stuff we deliver to the client nowadays. So, and one thing to do more server-side rendering again now is that idea of that island architecture. And the idea of the island architecture looks at a web page and says, okay, that's a C, and the C basically is all the static content. The C is everything we can calculate and pre-render on the server side. And in this C, we have some islands where actually we need interactivity for the user, where we need the user to have dynamic interactions possible to execute something or to get instant feedback on his interactions. And yeah, that's what I just said. And the C is server-side rendered. the islands enable this client-side interactivity, and these islands are then isolated components in Fresh. So I know there are other approaches, but in Fresh it makes it simpler if you consider islands first as isolated components. And these isolated components are pre-rendered on the server and sent to the client, and then they are re-rendered on the client as soon as they are hydrated, so to say. And this hydration step is that actually the JavaScript is evaluated on the client side, and then the user can interact. This two-step process has the benefit that the client sees much quicker what actually is the important information, so he can start to read and to start process the UI in his mind while the client adds the little bits and pieces for the interaction. One thing about islands is that they cannot be nested, but I found that not a drawback. It's just something to keep in mind. As the components you use on islands, they can of course be nested as you are used to it from Angular or from React. And so it's not a big drawback, it's just something to keep in mind. So this is actually what I wanted to show. This is a picture to show you what islands might be. So down here that are advertised with the footer and this subheader, that would be the static content, which is the C. And then you have those somewhat dynamic islands with different requirements, how interactive they have to be. And I sketched here the 3 big boxes, and to show you that the islands must not just or necessarily be such big boxes. An island can also be just a button. So then the button would be the interactive part and everything around it is static. Now to actually build useful stuff, it's a good thing they can be connected. They are not that much isolated as I might have suggested before. It's possible, as Preact implemented last year, the concept of signals much better. You can now send signals between your islands, and that might look like this. And actually, you can think of signals as a client state, as somewhat global client state. And in there, you put the information you want to be shared between your components on the client side. And then, of course, as we are server-side rendering stuff and client-side rendering stuff, you need to keep in mind what's happening where. So sometimes that might get confusing in the beginning. After a short while, I got used to it, and think it's a good thing to separate this. How does the client hydration work? So each component is separately hydrated, which is good for the performance. So it's not one after the other. It's actually done in parallel. And you can hydrate not just with data, but also with event handlers, or the other way around. I wanted to say event handlers is the dynamic reaction we want to have on the UX, but you can also hydrate afterwards with data. So if you have highly interactive data, you might send a first version of it, which you just had on the server side, and reload it instantly so the user gets the real up-to-date information. Yeah, and this mechanism, as I said, that speeds up the user experience a lot. And this is a lot nicer for the user not to look at a spinning wheel while the data is loaded, but first get a first set of the data instantly when loading the page. So all this is not done by Deno by Fresh from scratch. It's done by integrating Preact. Preact is a library that takes React and optimizes it for server-side rendering. So it also provides JSX templates. It has a virtual DOM abstraction. This is how it does the server-side rendering. So it renders on the server side in a virtual DOM, gets the HTML out of it, sends it to the client, and then this pre-rendered HTML gets enhanced with the client-side lifecycle. Yeah, and now we have signals to connect islands, and signals would basically look like this, where you have the properties, but I think that's much more plastic in the demo later on. Maybe to give you a full picture, routing in Fresh is done by file system-based routes, similar to Next.js. And this is what it practically looks like. You have over here the file names. In the file names, you place with brackets placeholders, and then these are the route patterns, or effectively the routes you can use in the application. I showed you that also in the IDE. About persistence, every application needs at some point persistence. Of course, Fresh is meant to be a front-end framework, so one could say, okay, every persistence is in the services behind this. But as it's based on Deno, you can also, for smaller applications, not put it into separate services or separate deployments. You can implement them with Deno on the server-side part in Fresh. And regardless if you implement it with Deno in a separate service or in your application, there is persistence around, as you might expect it. The major open source databases, MariaDB and Postgres, and MySQL as well, of course, are supported, as well as MongoDB, SQLite, and Firebase. And of course, every other DB that has a REST interface, which would then be addressed as a service. The interesting thing is that it already provides support for ORM, so for object relational mappers. One you might have heard of before, because to my knowledge there are some time at the market already, is Prisma.io, and they also implemented themselves an DenoDB wrapper or mapper, and this is quite useful. And already working, and yeah, that's where we are. The tooling is the CLI itself, as I listed the main capabilities of it before. Deno, they have a Visual Studio Code extension, which working quite nice, including support for the tests, including syntax highlighting, completion. It also has an IntelliJ extension, so you're not bound to that one IDE, of course. And for the tooling, they provide actually a hosting platform, which is called Deno Deploy, and it's really straightforward to deploy anything there. But you're not bound to it. Deploying it by yourself in a Docker container and then somewhere is quite easy. As I said, it's just one executable you need. Also, really important for the tooling is that the Preact developer tools are supported, so you can easily debug your front-end code. With tooling, this is not the full list. Of course, we need testing, and I mentioned that before. Deno provides a testing framework to do assertions, to do stepwise executions, and as soon as these basic unit test utilities are not sufficient anymore, you can extend them by these 3 frameworks, depending on what you want to do. So there are quite some options to actually get testing. Okay, that was the walk around. Now I want to share some look at source code with you, so to make it a little bit more entertaining, I hope. Let's increase the size here. So first, let's collapse these. Maybe to give you an overview, this is the project folder, and the import map is probably what's most interesting, as hearing dependencies are referenced by URLs might be frightening to some people. So you have that import map, and you still have your dependencies in one place. It's just for scripts or something else, Deno is capable to do it in another way, but I'm sure for any meaningful project you would do it in a central place. And then maybe even implement ESLint rule, which prohibits you from an HTTP inside an import statement. So you are forced to put them here. What is nice is that you actually can use them as partial paths. So this $fresh and $Deno things here are then used, for example, here. Actually, that is, and then you can append any special path you want to have in this dependency. This is quite nice. Okay, and then to the routes, as I said, you can use the bracelets as placeholders, and then they are just filled in with the parameters you pass in. Let me check if the server runs. Yeah, it does. So let's have a look quickly at that application I prepared. So that's basically an application that has some speaker names in it, and you can navigate through them back and forth. And if we, as we just have seen, there was that, sorry for that. There was, why? Oh, it's back, okay. There was that route where it would just take a parameter, that server param, here, TSX, and this is then picked up. So it would always, the precedents have special or fixed routes, like speakers TS, this is a service endpoint, or the list, actually. And as soon as that does not match, it would go to that parameter endpoint. And this is what happens here. It takes my input, renders it as a name, and also extends it with some details. So what else do I want to show you? Here we have an example for islands. I have 3 islands in my application. One island is this back and forth navigation through the list. One island is this control where I could now add myself and then see that's actually added. And one island is down here, that click counter. Now, that click counter I actually introduced to show you the use of signals. Let's figure out, is that still big enough? Do you, back rows? Okay, cool. Yeah, I would define a signal as a export, as a const, basically, and import that into my islands. And then I can use there just the value of it. This is the click counter, this shows the value. And in my other 2 components, I do on top here, I import that as well, and then I use it here to increase the value of it. And as you have seen, then preact takes care of it. It registered that by use signal, or by that signal function call, that it's used in multiple components, and then it's connected. So I click here, the buttons, and the counter goes up, and it's shown down there. So that's an example for connected islands. From the code point of view, you might, especially those who are familiar with React, you might have noticed it looks it's the same basically. It's just when implementing components for it, or when using existing components, there are some API differences. There are some polyfills to get around it. There are some libraries who are aware of the requirement to use this with preact and advertise with it. It's not always just a drop-in. That might be a drawback, but on the other hand, if you see the need to use that preact server-side rendering, it might be worth to push the library you like a bit to provide also preact compatibility. Here is, for example, I didn't implement the database connection here. I just implemented the list as a global array. So in case to the speaker's endpoint, this is a handler which probably looks familiar to you as when you have seen node code. This is just in standard HTTP handler. And if something is posted with to it, the body then gets used for a new speaker object, which is added to the list. Yeah, that's the quick walk around with Fresh. What is the? We still have a little time, so I can, together with you, maybe include another library just to show you that it's fairly straightforward to add an external library to it. There's a small library called Confetti, and that will show just confetti on the UI. And to show a confetti every time we click, we add a speaker. I add this to the import map, and then I go to my create form. Add the import here. To avoid typos, I prepared that a bit. And then I can use this imported function here in my onSubmit to let confetti be shown. And as I added a dependency, I have to restart the server because, to my experience, that's not quite stable if it's fetching the dependency on the fly or not. Every other change, the development mode, as you can see, it's too small here. No, it's not increasing the size. Okay, it watches basically your files, and it would reload dynamically the server side. The client side in development mode is refreshed every time you reload the page practically. So there's no caching while developing, which is quite nice for actually using the code. So I add a speaker and I see some confetti. Maybe more. So, okay, that's for the fun. Back to the slides. Did that too early? Okay. Then this way. All right. So maybe some background about who's behind Fresh. The one who does the most of the commits is Luca Casunato, and but around Fresh there is already an open source community, so he's not doing that work alone anymore. They have in Deno over 750 committers now. With Fresh it's over 100 committers, and it's growing. It's really nice to see, and they are open for suggestions and discussions. They have a fairly vibrant Discord server running, and it's really good to see that they're also answering not only interesting discussions, they're also answering any questions. They really try to keep that community going. Ryan Dahl founded the Deno company, and with the Deno company, they initiated that hosting service I mentioned. So they have actually a reason why to push Deno further, and they want to establish it. So my conclusion about Deno and Fresh. Yeah, of course, there is no Fresh without Deno. So it's just an additional layer to provide that Preact integration and to have actually a framework at hand. So, but it's built on other shoulders. It's not done all by themselves, as I showed. It's Preact is certainly one large component of it. Without Preact, it would be interesting what else would be left there. Yeah, the Deno ecosystem is still small. That's why I would or I am still hesitating to actually suggest that for production projects or customer projects. I like to experiment with that. Any showcase I can build or proof of concepts I can build, I do. And I just, at the moment, I'm watching and see how it's developing. The recently added node support, of course, helps a lot because that has extended the ecosystem by, I cannot tell how much. It's just much more code around now to build upon. That feature set is really promising. The speed, not only the runtime speed, also the development speed is really nice to experience. Is short round trips to get feedback after change. And also integrating it with a build pipeline, packaging it up in containers, pushing it to a Docker registry and using it on a Kubernetes cluster. That's straightforward. It's nothing special there, and I didn't stumble into any other problems than usual that the Postgres database would not accept the connections, but that's not related to Deno and Fresh. Yeah. Okay, so as I said, it's interesting for proof of concepts and pet projects at the moment, but it's really promising. I really like to see it thriving, and I'm curious to see what's coming next. They published a blog post where they were really looking forward to this year and see a lot of things coming without having concretely said what's meant by that. Okay, I'm from Karakun. We develop software, as probably everyone else. If you're looking for a job, you might stop by at our homepage. We are based in Basel, but we have also offices in other places, and we have a lot of people working remote, so we are open. Good, those are some resources. I will put that in the slides, you will get them. That's it from me. Thank you for joining me, and I'm here for your questions.
My naive guess is that you want to make the dynamic islands as small as possible. But how do you do when the application changes and the scope increases? Can you change the size of the islands, or do you add new ones?
Yeah, certainly. It might be a bit of a refactoring to actually maybe separate one island into two separate ones, but it's possible, absolutely. Yeah, but you're right. That's the idea, to keep them as small as possible to profit from the server-side rendering as much as possible.
Hello.
Hi.
Moving a lot of the calculations, the rendering into the server, under heavy load, how does it handle clustering and threading?
That's basically outside from Deno. I would handle that with on a Kubernetes cluster with just spinning up multiple front-end endpoint controllers.
Thank you.
But they also published comparison charts for the runtime behavior, and this looks really promising. I mean, it's also taken with a grain of salt, as always, if people compare themselves to others, but apparently they are much more efficient than, for example, Node. I have not measured that by myself because I don't really have that much load at the moment on those projects I've done.
More questions? I can take them. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for a really nice presentation. So what do you think about the Quick and Solid.js? When you start in the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned about how much JavaScript bytes we are shipping, and it's increased over time. So except server-side rendering, how the Fresh solving that problem, the shipping JavaScript problem?
Yeah, they transpile and cache on the fly, and up to now they are using only standards to compress it. So they are mostly focusing now on using islands and reducing the overall code and not shipping whole frameworks like Angular to the client and using that, but only the code necessary to make the islands dynamic. This is the main take for them to optimize this part.
And like how much it's like a performance difference in compared to Next.js or something? Because I don't know if you watched the talks of Quick or something. Like the hydration actually, it's the problem, even though it's come up as a solution. But shipping JavaScript is the problem, no matter what you are doing.
Yeah.
And in the island architecture, like if it's component and visible, it doesn't matter if you server-side render or not, because JavaScript is always downloaded, even if it's not running.
You just have the improvement that the user already has a viewable UI, and then the hydration happens. So while the user is busy, like grasping what he's looking at, the client can do the dynamic stuff. Yeah, that's the main advantage. That's true. It's still sending JavaScript to the client, and still that having that JavaScript evaluated so you get the dynamic behavior is still the drawback. Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, if you like those raccoons I had on the slides, I have stickers with me. If you want to have them, feel free to approach me. I'm here. I'm also this evening here. I'm also at that JavaScript user group tonight, and I will also be around tomorrow. So if you come up with any questions, feel free to approach me. Okay.
Thank you, and I'd like to ask all of the